and welcome to Healing Through Divorce, where we use a combination of clinical expertise, personal experience, and faith to navigate you through your healing journey. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Williams, and I thank you for joining us today. So, we are in for an amazing treat this episode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on my special guest right away. Her name is Zach Liotis. She is an amazing woman, and I will let you know who she is in a moment, but I'm going to have her come on in so you can say hi to everyone. Zach, come on in.
Hello, darling. Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Good, I am good. Welcome to our show. Welcome to Healing Through Divorce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the audience know sort of how the show goes. And then from there, we are going to dive in because I know we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We've got a lot of information we need to impart in people. So
Awesome.
anyone who is joining us live, first 30 minutes, Zach and I are going to be having our discussion, and we're going to be talking about spiritual warfare and what we need to do to engage our personal healing. After that, I need you to stick around because for the second half of the show, we will be doing a Q&A with you all. So make sure that you stay tuned. So Zach, I'm going to first of all let the audience know just a little bit about who you are, because listen, you are a force to be reckoned with.
Well, thank you.
Right? And then from there, we are going to dive in. So for people who don't know, Zach is a spiritual teacher, mentor, healer that helps women through difficult transitional phases in their life, regardless of aligning with their purpose, connecting with their spiritual guides, tapping into their happiness, or shifting careers by teaching them how to connect to the infinite energy that is supplied to all humanity. Zach is also a host on the Be Bold, Fierce, Unstoppable podcast, interviewing women and men that are making a difference in the world and sharing their knowledge with all that are ready to activate their soul. Listen, we are blessed to have you with us today. Thank you again so much. So I did mention a little bit of your bio, but Zach, could you just tell the audience just a little bit more about who you are? And also, I like to say right off the bat where they can find you, because I know that there are people out there that are going to need your help.
Thank you for that introduction. I got goosebumps all over my body when people introduce me. I'm like, ooh, who's she? I want to know who she is. But because it blows your mind when you live in the shell, right? You don't realize who you are until other people really just showcase you. And you're just like, wow, that is me.
Isn't it crazy, though, that it sometimes takes outside forces for you to then really recognize who you are and the type of powerhouse you are, right? And I also find it interesting that it's not only that, people from the outside can bring you up, but we'll also talk about this later. Those same outside forces can tear you apart really quick, right?
Now you give me real goosebumps talking by language.
Right? So it's just so interesting, the power that outside forces have. And I think that's definitely a spot we should definitely talk about, because I don't think a lot of people recognize how those forces influence them.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself. I was able to connect with spirit since I was at the age of 4. I didn't understand anything about the spirit world because I thought that, why am I able to see air but talk to energy? Or at that time, I didn't even know it was energy. It was just, I was talking to my best friend, Jessica, because that's who my imaginary friend was. And then as I grew and got older in my 20s, I had a massive spiritual awakening. I went through cancer, thyroid cancer. And that was my first awakening, which I still didn't even understand what awakening was, because I've always been guided by the universe. I was always protected by the universe. I always knew that there was an outside force. I just didn't understand it. And being brought up in a Orthodox household, you don't talk about these things because they're voodoo. They're wrong. They are the devil. We could talk about that later. That's the outside force we're going to be talking about, because I don't skip that. That's part of it. So I've learned a lot of different things. I went through the path of depression many times in my life because I didn't allow myself to step into my soul purpose and to really be who I was. I was more focused on what others are going to think about me, what they're going to say about me. Am I going to hurt anyone's feelings? Mom's not going to like it. She wants me to go to the priest to get blessed. Meanwhile, God's giving me the blessing. So why do I have to go to the priest? So a lot of different things were coming up. And I finally just said to myself, like, this is who I am, take it or leave it, like it or not. Like, I can't change me. God built me like this. This is, you know, a lot about me. And I studied myself for 7 years to recognize who I was, because I was working with a lot of women going through divorce, but I didn't understand why the women going through divorce were coming to me, because I'd never been married. And when I studied myself for 7 years, I knew and I learned that I was carrying a lot of women through trauma and teaching how to become empowered to leave toxic relationships. And this is really interesting because I've been in a few toxic relationships myself. And in that process, I never understood a lot of things. But once I started getting to know myself, my spirit, that is, my truth, I understood why women would come to me when they were going through divorce or transitional phases, was for me to really ignite the fire inside of them and to give them the eyes so they could see who they are. So in the journey of recognizing myself for 7 years, this was the crazy thing. I saw me in herds of women protecting me from the opposition, which we'll call the establishment. Because they don't want women to be strong and powerful. They wanted us to be this housewife. Meanwhile, women have a lot more, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this to you. There's nothing wrong with being a housewife, ladies. I'm not degrading that job at all, because a housewife is a house manager, a mom, a caregiver. It's like so many different positions, but when I saw this in my past life, I also saw that I was holding some men as well, getting out of toxic relationships. So as much as there was a lot of women, there was the odd man that wanted that feminine energy. So when I learned all this, I actually was like, oh, now I get it. And it took me a little while to really sit and dig deeper into it. But my greatest purpose is to empower women, for women to recognize who they are, for women to recognize that you are putting yourself in a position of weakness because you're afraid of your own strength.
Ooh.
And that's what it is. Yeah. You're afraid of your own strength, so you stay in that weakness.
Right, right. And I think that's where a lot of that outside forces come in, because if you are so, if you rather stay in that weak position, a lot of it is because there's a fear of, as you were mentioning before, in your own journey, what are other people going to think? How are other people going to react to me? All of these types of things. And then we have to now come about and say, you know what? I don't know if I want all of that. So I'm just going to I'm going to stay here in this mediocrity.
Yeah, I'm going to stay in my weakness to make everyone feel good
Right.
about themselves, because you know what? I can't live on my purpose because that's going to make them feel uncomfortable.
That's
So
it.
that's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
crazy how we think, right?
it is, because it just seems like what we do is we take so much responsibility for other people's feelings, other people's mediocrity, other people's insecurities, that
Yeah.
what we end up doing is diminishing ourselves in the midst of this.
Yeah, it's funny. We diminish it. But the funny thing is, it's not funny at all, actually. I just say it's funny because I think it's funny now. But when you're going through it's not funny. We diminish ourselves to be at that same level other people see us at, rather than rise above, because they can't handle that. They can't handle our truth. When
Right.
we are in our power, we're standing in our truth. When we are in that bold, fierce, unstoppable, that's the business that I have. When you're in that bold, fierce, unstoppable self, people will make a pathway for you because your energy is so strong, and they're just like, ooh, who's that? Right. And sometimes we get uncomfortable with the who's that. So
Mhm.
who's that is about really getting to know yourself and being comfortable with yourself, really saying, you know what, this is what I want. I don't want this anymore. And that's where I think we get really afraid, is to ask for what we want and to go for what we want, because we're just living in someone else's box rather than unwrapping it, unraveling it, and allowing us to blossom from it.
I
So,
also think what's very interesting as well is what you mentioned about working with a lot of women that are, going through transitional phases, going through, divorce and all of these types of things, because, you know, there's this almost inherent fear of change. I've invested so much of my time and my energy into this. This is, well, maybe this is not the life that I have ascribed to, but maybe I should just take it because this is, I've invested so much in it. What if I lose everything? So a lot of times the what ifs really come into play, right? So it's also just fascinating that you have so many women that are coming to you, wanting that transition. What do you think is their breaking point, or them coming to their moment where they're like, this mediocrity is not enough?
Yeah, you know what? I don't even think they realize the mediocrity. They feel the exhaustion first. I
Oh,
can't do this anymore. I
hmm,
can't do this anymore. I can't be in this marriage anymore. And typically women with kids will stay in a marriage for 15 years extra. From the time they said, I don't want to be with him, 15 years goes by before they even get those papers because they want to keep on trying. Let's go to therapy. Let's go to church. Let's talk to the pastor. But let's ignore what God's telling us inside of us.
hmm.
Right. And that's what it is. Like, you're going to seek out your pastor, but meanwhile, God's inside you. And nothing's wrong with the pastor. Don't get me wrong. Listen, I go to church, people. Don't get it wrong. But at the end of the day, the pastor is a pastor. Your heart is your heart. You could pray all you want, but when God has a path for you, regardless if you've been in a marriage for 20 years, you're done that contract. It is time for you to step into your purpose. And that's why the exhaustion, the mediocrity, that's why the toxic relationship, the cheating goes on. That's why I'm working late hours, honey. Okay, great. Because then people, this is like the patterns that I've seen working with women. They're always focusing on the work, or men. I'm going to just stay at work a little long. I'm going to do more work because the home environment is not healthy. If
Hmm.
your home environment is healthy, you're jumping in your car at 5 minutes to 5, or a minute to 5, and saying, I'm going home to my spouse.
Right.
Right. But when your relationship is toxic and you're exhausted, why are you jumping in your car to go home to what? Exhaustion. So that's what I think it is. I think that first step for women is, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore.
Okay.
Or some women have stayed in for the marriage, for their children. I always say to women, what are you teaching your kids? Are
That's
you,
right.
and that's what drives me crazy. Like, I feel like I'm the voice for children, because I'm
Mm,
always like, what are you teaching your kids? Like, are you teaching your kids it's okay for, the arguments to happen in your house? Like, what was your family dynamics like? And
right.
then when you go down that family tree, it's like, oh, interesting. So it's that constant roller coaster over there. So, okay, so when are you going to break this? When are you going to
Right.
break this pattern? And
Right.
that's what I think the hard thing is for a lot of women, is to break that pattern. Because what are people going to say? Again, that external noise comes in.
Yes. Yes. And part of the external noise, which I wanted to touch upon, because we're obviously going to be we're talking about spiritual warfare today.
Mhm.
Uh, what I find is some of that external noise is the church and religion itself, right? Like, let's dive into that a little bit, because we're talking about spiritual warfare, but you have religious institutions that have taught generation to generation, it's the vows, for better, for worse, richer, for poorer, sickness and in health. So I need to stay here, regardless of how toxic this relationship is, how much that, the other person, the man, just does not want to be part of this, or he's already checked out, or he is so insecure, all he can do is find his security in another, between another woman's legs. But that's another story. But you know what I mean? Like, there's so much there, but you have this indoctrination, let's put it that way, by these religious institutions, who basically are conditioning women in particular that, you're going to be bad, you're going to be cursed if you leave this marriage, if you get a divorce. Jesus frowns upon divorce. So how do we even start to navigate some of that? Because that, to me, it seems to be one of those I mean, there's other outside forces as well,
Mhm.
but that seems to be one of those outside forces that seem to be very strong, for women that are having difficulty getting out of divorces or getting out of relationships.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that, because a lot of my clients are churchgoers, and then they come to me and I'm like, okay, now erase the church and we're not going to talk about church because I want to know who wrote those vows. Who wrote those vows? Did Jesus write those vows? Did God write those vows? Because really, when I look at God or higher power, I think, does God want to see me miserable in this marriage?
Thank you.
That's all I have to say. So when I work with women, they're like, but my pastor said this. I'm like, great, I'm glad that your pastor said that. But do you think God's gonna want to see you angry, miserable, and in this place of despair, crying every day for help and help and help, but you're still living that same cycle over and over and over from generation to generation? And then they're feeding you this stuff in church. Church is man-made. Let's just call a spade a spade. I'm just going to put it out there.
Absolutely.
Church is man-made. It's a business. It's a business. And church, like I said, I go to church. My church is every day, basically, here, because God meets me in my heart. And if my heart is broken, Jesus wept, because Jesus weeps with each and every one of us. So we could sit here and cry, and Jesus is going to hold us tight. But he's going to say to us, hey, sister, let me just say something to you, run. But then you're going to say, oh, no, but, the pastor told me it's not good. I'm sinning. Really? You're sinning for your happiness? Like, we really have to think about this. Does God want to see us miserable? Does he want to see us happy? Does he want to see us living on purpose, or just want to see us living off on the path of destruction? And we go through drugs, and we go through alcohol, then we go through sex addiction, and we think of suicide thoughts, then we go through depression. What kind of a God are you preaching to? Who are you praying to? That's not my God. So if your church is going to teach you that, really at the end of the day, you got to look at it, because this is coming so strong to me. There's wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes.
And this is a lot of, and I had a client that she says to me, Zach, I go to church, and, the pastor in the church told me this. And as soon as she told me the pastor's name, I was like, run. I felt this heaviness in my chest. I was like, run. She ain't teaching about Jesus. She ain't teaching about Jesus. Run. And it's interesting, because then I kept on talking to her, and she says, wow, I'm so glad I ran into you and we worked together. And I said, why? She says, everyone left the church. They found the pastor was being demonic.
Oh my.
I said, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to me, I think even when we talk about it, saying that, the church is a business, it's man-made. There's four walls and whatever. And the thing is that obviously Jesus has to be, God has to be invited in for there to be true power, right? If the power lies solely in the pastor, that can then be not only just demonic, but very self-serving as well. And that's where you see the downfall of a lot of churches. But I also believe that a lot of times what we don't look at is there's a difference between religious practice and your personal relationship with God. Yes. And a lot of times we muddle the two so much that what we end up doing is confusing the two. Like when someone says, and listen, I'm speaking from experience, raised in the church, always believed I had a strong relationship with God, but I also knew that a lot of what I learned was through the ritual of going to church every Sunday, Sunday school. These are the things that you're taught as you're growing up. And when I thought I had a relationship with God, and you know what, I did. Yeah. And let me rephrase it. I did have a relationship with God, but I find that in adversity, you notice how you need to lean on him more. And then what happens is you strengthen that connection and bond with God. And what you do is then you almost see the institution of the church, what it is. The church was helpful. And again, I'm same as you, Zach. I go to church, those kinds of things. I believe in fostering and strengthening that relationship with communing with like-minded people and listening to a pastor, a teacher who has studied the word and can impart wisdom in me. But you cannot negate the relationship that each one of us have with God. And when God is trying to speak to us, religious doctrine should not be getting in the way.
Yeah. And that's what I think it is. I think we put we give too much power to the pastors and other people
Mm,
rather than harnessing that power within our own self and really connecting on that deeper level. The most important thing is to have a relationship with God. I hear with your God, but with God in general. But
mhm.
you have to also ask yourself the deeper question, who is God to me?
Right.
Right? Because, I've listened to so many different sermons and I heard people say, some churches you go to, there's beat up cars outside. So what are they teaching in that church? And then other churches you go to, there is beautiful, high, like Bentleys and Mercedes and being like high level cars. What are they teaching in church, right? And the
Mm,
reason I'm saying this is because a pastor is going to give you his wisdom as well. Like, yes, he's learned theology. Yes, he's been through all the teachings, but he's also a human.
right.
And
Right.
some pastors think that they're God.
Hmm.
I've come to meet some pastors that they think that they're God. And literally, I've had one pastor go to me, I'm Pastor so-and-so, and my body just cringed. And I was like, oh, you think that you're God, the way
Mm,
you're acting, the way you're speaking to me. And it was really interesting because interesting human being, at the end of the day, we feel that we have this power inside of us. But how are we harnessing this power? How are we utilizing this power? Are we projecting it onto others to make us feel good about ourselves, right? And that's what I found. But when we're talking about a relationship with Jesus or God or within our heart, within ourselves, you need to know who your God is. Okay,
mm,
so God is strength, God is power, God is love, God is understanding, God is peace. So then why are we living in destruction and hatred and
that's
anger and despair?
right.
So if God is all this, why are we living in this? So
Right.
you could sit there and go to church and preach on Sundays, but then you're leaving church and you're angry on Monday.
Mm, mm.
Does that make sense to you? So really, who is your God? Who are you looking up to when you're on your knees and saying, I need help? Is it the God of salvation, peace, and love? Or is it the God of destruction, anger, and isolation?
Mm. And then that's interesting to me that you say that, because the minute you said about, the God of isolation and destruction, for example, then I'm going to just go out on a limb here because I'm pretty sure this is going to be received very interestingly. Does that mean you're worshiping the devil? If you think about it, or that the devil is your God?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it in so many ways.
Let's just think about that for a second, because if we're accepting destruction and mayhem and just this mediocrity, that means the enemy has infiltrated our lives and infiltrated our thoughts to make us believe that this is so, which means we are not communing with God, because that's not who God is. So
Yeah.
that means we have been infiltrated by the enemy.
Yeah. And okay, I love this subject right now. Now you're firing me up, because the reason you're firing me up, I always tell the devil, I said to the devil today, I'm like, you can't hold me down anymore.
Mm,
You've done held me down. You know my purpose. I'll say this right now to y'all. The devil knows your purpose and your gifts better than you do.
yes, it.
Right. And so when the devil sees your power, when the devil sees your light, when the devil sees your purpose, and the devil sees you moving forward, regardless if it's out of divorce, out of a career, starting an entrepreneurship, whatever it may be. And the devil's like, oh, she's making moves. What's the first thing that I got to do? He says, I got to get in her brain. I got to tell her she's not good. I got to put doubt in her. I got to put fear in her. I got to put lack in her. I got to put limitation in her. And then what do we do? We question ourselves. Can I do it? And then what else do? You go out there and talk to people that can't even see it for themselves. And then
That's
they
right.
put doubt. So now you have not only the energy of the darkness, which is the enemy that's coming at you. Now you have your mama, your sister, your brother, your aunt, your friend, your coworker. You have everyone going, it won't work. You can't do that. So when God plants something inside of you, that seed, don't water it with other people's doubts.
That's
Water
right.
it with your knowingness. And this is what it's all about, because then the devil gets in your mind and says all these things, and then you're questioning yourself, and then your feet stop working. And then you
Right.
have all this suffering in your heart going, well, maybe I can't because when I was a child, this happened. And then in school, that happened. And they told me I wasn't going to amount to anything. That's what my teachers told me. So it told me I wasn't going to amount to anything. So why would I think I could do this now? Right. And then the devil goes, yeah, you can't do it. You can't do it. So that's when you have to really go within and be like, okay, so who's my God? Right? Who's my God? Like, who's coming in this force right now? Because if I'm feeling like this inside of me, this isn't God telling me, oh, you can't do it, because God doesn't even know how to say you can't do it.
That's right.
He doesn't know how to say that. So he says, it's going to say, take step by step, and the universe, and I will help you at the end of the day. But what do we stay focused on most of the time is the enemy. And I want to say this, because a lot of people say, well, you attract what you have going inside. I'm going to call bullshit on that. Because you don't attract what's always going on inside. Because the enemy is an external force that will try to stop you on your step. And right. I say this because I've been feeling both sides of this world, dark and light, since I was 4 years old. I have seen the devil in front of my eyes while Jesus is standing beside me saying, you remember what I taught you? Go for it. So at the end of the day, Jesus is always there. But the thing is, Jesus stays silent a lot of the times. It's the devil that's loud. So when people say you attract what's going on inside of you, just say bullshit. No, I'm not. It's the enemy that's trying to hold me back, because what's inside of me is too powerful for me to go out there, that the devil wants to stop me, because the devil knows that my purpose is stronger than his will to hold me back.
That's it. That's it. And on top of that, remember that they always say that the enemy is like a roaring lion. So, that the enemy will roar, will be loud or whatever, but it's like a roaring lion. The enemy only has the power that you give it.
Yeah.
If you really, really think about it. And especially what I love what you just said, and I think this is one of the things that, I want to make sure that the audience takes away with them is that if we truly lean on Jesus' word and what he said, we would be able to be empowered and equipped with everything that we need. But far too often, what we do is we forget what Jesus has said and what he said about his people. And so quickly, we end up running to the enemy, running to him instead. So what ends up happening, and here's the other thing with the enemy, and I know that we're going to have to pick this up in our in our next episode next week, because I know we've just scratched the surface. The enemy will end up using anybody that he believes is going to fulfill his purpose. So this is why when you mentioned earlier, when you have the barrage of your aunt, your mother, your cousin, all these people that you consider family, whom are close to you, whom you believe are supporting you, that's a lot of time who the enemy uses. Now, this includes if you're in a toxic relationship, they will use your spouse.
Yeah.
Or that friend. Because I know when we talk about healing through divorce, we talk about divorce as a metaphor, not only for, romantic relationships, but we also talk about friendships, work relationships, but then also the relationship with yourself. Yeah. So it's just fascinating that the enemy will use all of these types of people whom we believe we've entrusted and who have our best interest and all of that kind of stuff to really water down exactly what it is that God has for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I divorced depression. I remember that day. I said depression.
Yes.
So I get that's the whole thing. I love the metaphor of divorce, because when I divorced depression, I never met up with depression again. And when I did meet up with depression, I'd be like, I'm coming back if you don't smarten up. So depression knew that there was a time where I laid in bed once. I was like, I feel like this. And I just heard depression say to me, hey, I'm about to come back if you don't wake up. And it was the most interesting time. I literally jumped out of bed. And I was like, I called a friend. I said, hey, I just need to be around people right now. And they said, yeah, come, let's go. And it was like my energy shifted. So as much as we say divorce and to let go, we have to also remember that that energy is also there to support us through our spirit too, right? So when it sees that, but as you were speaking, I kept on hearing spirit say that, Jesus say this to me, I hear, say my name. So Jesus say this. You know how I do something like, it's the universe. No, it's Jesus.
Jesus.
So the one thing that, as we're speaking about this, I want everyone to realize this too, that when you're going through some sort of divorce, whatever that is in your life, not everyone's going to agree with you. Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone is going to support you. Not everyone's going to welcome you after whatever you've gone through. Now look at Jesus. He's been spit on. He was spit on, he was talked about, he was beat up, he was crucified. Not everyone liked him, and he was kicked out of a couple of cities. So if they've done that to him, that he has the power to come into this world through a spirit, what makes you any different? So
That's
be
right.
Jesus, be able to not take things personal, be welcomed where you feel welcomed. Walk into the hands of those that are there to support you, walk away from those that don't have the best interest in you, and just keep on going. You can't take anything personal. I can't imagine if Jesus said, I take what you've said to me personal, and then he's crying through it. Like, I can't see that, because the power of God is stronger than the tears of water that are coming out of you, but still Jesus will weep with you, because he still feels pain, he still feels suffering, he still feels hurt. He, as a human, it's an energy frequency. So that is really coming through really strong right now, is don't worry about what others' emotions, feelings, and thoughts are about you, because at the end of the day, you're the only one that's standing in your shoes, and you're the only one that's truly knowing what's going on in your life. Not everyone knows what's going on in your life. And we all have those deep, dark secrets that we hold on to, that only if you knew you would understand, right?
That's it. You know what? We're going to pick this up in our next episode. So Zach, you'll come back with us next week to continue to share. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. You know what? Because listen, as I said, we've just scratched the surface. So Zach will be back with us next week, next episode, so that we can dive into this so much more. We have not just scratched the surface, but, we've opened up a couple of boxes here that we need to, just really dive into and talk about a bit more. So in saying that, that is our episode for today. And what I will let you know is I want everyone to be well and be blessed and be healed. I will see you next time.
Thank you.